A millionaire pays a desperate mother to carry his child, but the truth shatters him. The rain came down in relentless sheets, hammering the worn roof of the tiny apartment where Lisa sat, staring blankly at the stack of unpaid bills on the table. Her fingers trembled as she ran them through her dark, tangled hair, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. What was she supposed to do? How could she keep going like this? The eviction notice pinned to the fridge was the loudest voice in the room, reminding her that time was running out. Her son, Timmy, only 4 years old, sat on the floor nearby, playing with a collection of mismatched toys. He had no idea how close they were to losing everything, and Lisa wanted to keep it that way. His laughter, innocent and sweet, was her only solace, the one thing that kept her from completely crumbling. "Mommy, look." Timmy held up a plastic dinosaur, its once bright paint chipped and faded. Lisa forced a smile, nodding enthusiastically. "Wow, Timmy, that's a big one. Is he going to fight the other dinosaurs?" Timmy giggled, creating roaring sounds as he smashed the dinosaur into another toy. Lisa turned back to the bills, her stomach twisting into knots. The numbers blurred together, each one a painful reminder of how far behind she was. The notice from the electric company said their power would be shut off in 3 days if she didn't pay at least half of the overdue amount. That might as well have been $1 million. She couldn't do this anymore. Not alone. The knock on the door startled her, dragging her out of her spiraling thoughts. Lisa frowned, glancing at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 8 at night. Who would be visiting her now? Timmy paused his play and looked up, wide-eyed. "Is it Daddy?" he asked hopefully. Lisa's heart clenched. "No, sweetie. Daddy's not coming back." Her voice was steady, but inside, it felt like she was breaking apart all over again. She stood, smoothing the wrinkles from her second-hand sweater, and made her way to the door. When she opened it, she was met with an unexpected sight. A tall man in an expensive suit stood there, his sharp features softened slightly by the dim hallway light. His polished leather shoes barely made a sound as he shifted his weight slightly. Behind him stood another man equally well-dressed, holding a briefcase. Lisa's brow furrowed. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious. Men like this didn't show up at doors like hers without a reason, and that reason was rarely good. "Ms. Harper." The man's voice was smooth, almost disarming. "My name is Jonathan Reed. May I come in? I'd like to discuss something that could benefit both of us." Lisa's first instinct was to say no. She didn't trust strangers, especially not ones in suits who looked like they belonged in glossy magazines. But something in the way he said benefit caught her attention. She glanced back at Timmy, who was now hiding behind her leg, his dinosaur clutched tightly in his small hands. "I don't know if that's a good idea," Lisa said slowly. "What do you want?" Jonathan smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I promise you, Ms. Harper, I'm not here to waste your time. What I have to offer could change your life." Her life. Lisa almost laughed at the absurdity of the statement. What could a man like him possibly offer her that would fix the mess she was drowning in? But then again, what did she have to lose? With a reluctant sigh, she stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Fine. You have 5 minutes?" Jonathan nodded, stepping inside. His assistant followed silently, placing the briefcase on the small, wobbly table in the center of the room. Jonathan glanced around, his expression neutral, but Lisa caught the way his gaze lingered on the peeling wallpaper and the sagging couch. She felt a surge of embarrassment, her cheeks flushing with heat. "I'll get straight to the point," Jonathan began, turning to face her. "I'm looking for someone to carry my child. A surrogate. And I'm willing to pay you $1 million to do it." The words hit Lisa like a physical blow. She blinked, convinced she hadn't heard him correctly. "I'm sorry, what?" $1 million, Jonathan repeated, his tone calm, as if this was the kind of conversation he had every day. "In exchange for carrying my child. All expenses will be covered, of course. Medical bills, living arrangements, anything you need." Lisa stared at him, her mind racing. This had to be some kind of joke, right? People didn't just show up offering millions of dollars to strangers. "Why me?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. "Let's just say, I've done my research. You meet the criteria I'm looking for." Her eyes narrowed. "Criteria? What criteria?" "You're healthy," Jonathan said simply. "You've already had a child, so we know your body can handle pregnancy. And most importantly, you need the money." The bluntness of his words stung, but Lisa couldn't deny the truth in them. She did need the money. Desperately. Still, the idea was overwhelming, almost surreal. "And what about the father?" she asked. "What about the child's mother?" Jonathan's expression darkened slightly. "There is no mother. The child will be mine, and mine alone." Lisa's chest tightened. This man, this stranger, wanted her to bring a child into the world. His child, for $1 million. It sounded insane. But then she thought about Timmy, about the eviction notice, about the stack of unpaid bills. $1 million could change everything. It could give her son a future. "You'd really pay me $1 million?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," Jonathan said firmly. "But there are conditions. You'd move into a house I provide for the duration of the pregnancy. Regular checkups, no questions about my personal life, and absolute discretion." Lisa felt her knees weaken. This was it, the lifeline she'd been praying for. But it came with so many strings, so many unknowns. Could she really go through with this? "I need time to think," she said, her voice barely audible. Jonathan nodded. "Of course. Take 24 hours. But I'll need your decision by tomorrow evening." He handed her a card with his contact information and turned to leave. His assistant picked up the briefcase, and the two men disappeared into the night as quickly as they had arrived. Lisa closed the door, leaning against it as her mind swirled with 1,000 thoughts. $1 million. It could save her. It could save Timmy. But at what cost? Lisa barely slept that night. The sound of rain on the roof mirrored the storm inside her mind. She lay on the lumpy couch, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts refusing to settle. $1 million. She could hardly wrap her head around the sheer magnitude of the number. It wasn't just money, it was salvation. It was freedom from the suffocating weight of bills, eviction threats, and the constant guilt of not being able to provide enough for Timmy. But then there was the other side of it. The man, Jonathan Reed. He was a stranger, and his proposition, though tempting, felt unsettling. There was something about the way he had looked at her, his tone so calm and calculated, that left her uneasy. He didn't feel like the kind of man who left things to chance. He had chosen her for a reason, and that reason still wasn't entirely clear. Timmy stirred in his sleep, curled up under a thin blanket on the other end of the couch. Lisa watched him, her heart aching. He was the reason she had to consider this. His little face, so peaceful and innocent, reminded her of everything she was fighting for. The guilt of even thinking about saying yes clawed at her, but the thought of saying no filled her with dread. She couldn't lose their home. She couldn't fail him. The hours dragged on, and by the time the first light of dawn peeked through the blinds, Lisa felt no closer to a decision. She got up, moving quietly so as not to wake Timmy, and made herself a cup of instant coffee. The bitter taste was a poor substitute for sleep, but it was all she had. She stared at the card Jonathan had left, the neat black letters spelling out his name and number. The card felt heavy in her hand, as if it carried the weight of her entire future. By midday, Lisa still hadn't made up her mind, but the urgency of the situation forced her to act. She knew she couldn't face this decision alone, so she called her best friend, Maria. Maria had been her rock ever since high school, the one person she could always turn to when life felt impossible. If anyone could help her think clearly, it was Maria. "Wait," Maria said, her voice sharp with disbelief when Lisa finished explaining everything. "A random millionaire showed up at your door last night and offered you $1 million to have his baby? Lisa, please tell me this is some kind of joke." "I wish it were," Lisa said, her voice hollow. "But it's real. He's real. And he wasn't exactly random. He said he'd done his research. He knows I need the money." "That's creepy," Maria said. "It sounds like something out of a bad thriller movie. Are you sure this guy isn't some kind of psycho?" Lisa sighed, rubbing her temples. "I don't know, Maria. But the money. I can't stop thinking about what it could do for Timmy. First, I wouldn't have to worry about rent or bills. I could get him into a good school. It's everything I've ever wanted for him. I get that, Maria said, her tone softening. But Lisa, this is a huge decision. It's not just about the money. You'd be carrying this man's child for 9 months. That's not something you can just undo if it doesn't feel right. I know, Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. But what other choice do I have? I'm running out of time. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Maria spoke again, her voice was firm. If you decide to do this, promise me you'll be careful. Get everything in writing. Make sure you know exactly what you're getting into. Lisa nodded, even though Maria couldn't see her. I promise. The next evening, Lisa sat in her tiny kitchen, staring at the phone. The card with Jonathan's number lay on the table, its sharp edges a stark contrast to the chaos in her mind. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and dialed the number. The phone barely rang twice before Jonathan answered. "Miss Harper," he said, his voice as calm and smooth as it had been the night before. "Have you made your decision?" Lisa hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. I'll do it, she said finally, the words feeling heavy as they left her mouth. "But I have conditions. I want everything in writing, and I need to know exactly what I'm agreeing to." "Of course," Jonathan said, sounding almost pleased. "I wouldn't have it any other way. My assistant will bring the necessary paperwork to your home tomorrow. Once everything is signed, we can move forward." Lisa's stomach churned. There was no turning back now. The next morning, Jonathan's assistant arrived with a stack of documents thicker than any book Lisa had ever read. The contract detailed every aspect of the arrangement: a schedule of medical appointments, a strict diet plan, and the conditions under which she would live for the duration of the pregnancy. Everything was laid out in cold, clinical terms, with no room for ambiguity. The money, a staggering $1 million, would be paid in installments. A small advance to cover her immediate expenses, followed by monthly payments, and the remainder upon delivery of the child. Lisa signed the papers with a trembling hand, each stroke of the pen feeling like a step deeper into uncharted territory. As soon as the paperwork was finalized, things began moving at a dizzying pace. Within a week, Lisa and Timmy were relocated to a sprawling house on the outskirts of the city. The house was far more luxurious than anything Lisa had ever known, with high ceilings, gleaming hardwood floors, and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. It felt more like a museum than a home, cold and impersonal despite its beauty. Timmy, however, was thrilled. He ran from room to room, his laughter echoing through the empty halls. Lisa tried to share his excitement, but a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong here. The house wasn't hers, and neither was the life she was now living. Jonathan visited occasionally, always unannounced. He would check on Lisa's progress, asking polite but detached questions about her health and the baby. He was cordial, even kind, but there was a distance in his demeanor that kept Lisa on edge. She couldn't tell if it was because he didn't trust her or if he simply wasn't used to connecting with people. One evening, while Timmy was asleep, Lisa decided to explore the house. She wandered through the halls, her bare feet silent against the polished floors. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made her feel like she was being watched. She found herself drawn to a room she hadn't seen before, its doors slightly ajar. Inside, the walls were lined with bookshelves, and a large desk sat in the center of the room. It looked like an office, but it felt different from the rest of the house. Warmer, more lived in. As Lisa stepped inside, her eyes were drawn to a photograph on the desk. It was of a woman, her smile radiant and her eyes full of life. Lisa felt a pang of jealousy, though she couldn't quite explain why. She picked up the frame, studying the woman's face. Her name was Evelyn. Jonathan's voice came from behind her, startling Lisa. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "She was my wife." Lisa placed the photo back on the desk, her cheeks burning. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "It's fine," Jonathan said, cutting her off. He stepped into the room, his gaze lingering on the photo. "She passed away 3 years ago." "I'm sorry," Lisa said softly, unsure of what else to say. Jonathan nodded, his eyes distant. She wanted children more than anything. But we never got the chance. He turned to Lisa, his expression hardening. That's why this has to work. Lisa swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling heavily on her chest. She nodded, unable to speak. In that moment, she realized just how much was riding on this arrangement, not just for her, but for Jonathan as well. Lisa avoided the office after that night. Something about seeing Evelyn's photograph, coupled with Jonathan's somber revelation, left her feeling uneasy. She couldn't shake the image of his expression as he spoke about his late wife, a mixture of longing and determination that bordered on obsession. It made her question just how much she really knew about the man who now had control over so much of her life. Days turned into weeks, and the routine of her new life settled in. She attended regular doctor's appointments, met with a nutritionist, and followed the rigid schedule Jonathan's team had outlined for her. The house, though luxurious, felt more like a gilded cage. She spent most of her time with Timmy, who was adjusting to the change far better than she was. He loved exploring the vast garden, climbing trees, and pretending to be a knight defending a castle. His joy was the one bright spot in the otherwise isolating experience. Jonathan continued his visits, always brief and businesslike. He rarely spoke about anything personal, focusing solely on Lisa's health and the baby's progress. But every so often, there were cracks in his composed demeanor, moments when he seemed almost human. Once, he caught sight of Timmy drawing on the floor and paused, watching him with an expression Lisa couldn't quite decipher. "That's a good dragon," Jonathan said, his voice softer than usual. Timmy beamed, holding up his drawing. "Thanks. Do you like dragons?" Jonathan hesitated, then nodded. "I used to, when I was your age." Lisa watched the exchange with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. It was the first time she'd seen Jonathan interact with Timmy, and for a moment, it seemed like he might have a heart buried beneath his cold exterior. But just as quickly as it appeared, the moment passed. Jonathan straightened, his walls going back up, and excused himself. One evening, as Lisa was putting Timmy to bed, she noticed that he seemed quieter than usual. His normally bright eyes were dull, and his little hands clutched his favorite stuffed animal tightly. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. Timmy shrugged, his lower lip trembling. "I miss home." Lisa's heart ached at his words. She reached out, brushing a curl of hair away from his forehead. "I know, baby. I miss it too. But this is just for a little while, okay? Once everything is done, we'll go back." Timmy looked up at her, his expression serious in a way that seemed far too grown up for a 4-year-old. "Promise?" Lisa nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I promise." But as she tucked him in and kissed his forehead, a wave of guilt washed over her. Could she really keep that promise? The money was supposed to solve all their problems, but the longer she stayed in Jonathan's house, the more trapped she felt. It wasn't just the physical isolation, it was the sense that she was losing control of her own life. The next morning, Lisa decided to confront Jonathan about her concerns. She found him in the dining room, sipping his coffee and reading the paper. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable as always. "Jonathan," she began, her voice steady but firm. "We need to talk." He set the paper down, gesturing for her to sit. "What's on your mind?" Lisa hesitated, searching for the right words. "This arrangement, it's starting to feel like I'm just a pawn in some kind of plan you haven't fully explained. I deserve to know more. About you. About why you chose me." Jonathan's jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought he might refuse to answer. But then he sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I told you before, my wife wanted children and we never got the chance. After she passed, I realized that if I didn't take control of the situation, I might never have a family. That explains why you want a child," Lisa said, her tone sharp. "But it doesn't explain why you're so secretive. Or why you chose me specifically. There has to be more to it." Jonathan stared at her, his eyes cold and calculating. "You're right. There's more. But some truths are better left undisclosed, Miss Harper. For your sake and mine." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. His words were both a warning and a dismissal. She opened her mouth to press further, but Jonathan stood, effectively ending the conversation. As the weeks passed, Lisa found herself increasingly uneasy. The house's opulence, once novel, now felt suffocating. Jonathan's visits, though infrequent, left her on edge, and his cryptic statements only fueled her paranoia. She began noticing small things that didn't add up: locked doors she wasn't allowed to open, conversations between Jonathan and his assistant that stopped abruptly when she entered the room. One night, unable to sleep, Lisa wandered the house, her bare feet silent against the cold floors. She found herself drawn to the office again, the door slightly ajar. The photograph of Evelyn still sat on the desk, a haunting reminder of the life Jonathan had lost. But this time, Lisa's eyes were drawn to a drawer partially open beneath the desk. Curiosity tugged at her, and before she could think better of it, she knelt down and pulled it open. Inside was a stack of papers, neatly organized. At first glance, they looked like financial documents, but as Lisa flipped through them, she realized they were something far more personal. There were photos of her, some taken from a distance, others close enough to make her skin crawl. There were notes about her medical history, her family, her financial struggles. It was as if Jonathan had compiled an entire dossier on her life. Her hands trembled as she held the papers, her mind racing. This wasn't just about her being a surrogate. Jonathan had been watching her for far longer than she realized. What did he want from her? A noise from the hallway made her jump, and she quickly shoved the papers back into the drawer, closing it as quietly as she could. Her heart pounded as she slipped out of the office and back to her room, her mind reeling from the discovery. The next day, Lisa could barely focus. The knowledge of what she'd found weighed heavily on her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She considered confronting Jonathan, but the memory of his warnings stopped her. For now, she decided, it was safer to keep quiet and try to piece together the truth on her own. But the unease only grew. Jonathan's visits became more frequent, and his questions about her health took on a new urgency. He seemed more on edge than usual, his polished demeanor cracking under the pressure of something Lisa couldn't yet understand. One afternoon, as Lisa played with Timmy in the garden, she noticed Jonathan watching them from a window. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his gaze that sent a shiver down her spine. She scooped Timmy up, holding him close, and retreated inside. That evening, as Lisa prepared dinner, she finally decided she couldn't keep her discovery to herself any longer. She picked up her phone and called Maria, her voice shaking as she recounted what she'd found in the office. "Lisa, this is serious," Maria said, her tone filled with concern. "You need to get out of there. Take Timmy and leave." "I can't," Lisa said, her voice cracking. "I signed a contract. And even if I wanted to leave, I don't have anywhere to go." Maria was silent for a moment before speaking again, her voice firm. "Then you need to figure out what he's hiding. If you know the truth, maybe you'll have some leverage. But be careful, Lisa. Promise me you'll be careful?" Lisa nodded, though Maria couldn't see her. "I promise." But as she hung up the phone and stared out the window at the darkened garden, she couldn't help but wonder if it was already too late. Lisa's resolve to uncover the truth about Jonathan deepened with every passing day. The more she thought about the dossier in his office, the more questions it raised. Why had he been watching her for so long? The answers were locked away behind Jonathan's cold demeanor, and she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he was hiding went far beyond a desire for a surrogate. That night, Lisa lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Timmy slept soundly beside her, his small hand clutching hers even in his dreams. She envied his peace, his innocence. But as much as she wanted to protect him from the world's harshness, the walls of Jonathan's house seemed to close in on her more with each passing day. The next morning, she decided to try again. If Jonathan wouldn't give her answers willingly, she would have to find them herself. After breakfast, she sent Timmy outside to play, keeping an eye on him through the kitchen window. The garden was enclosed, safe, and filled with enough trees and bushes to keep him occupied for hours. She needed him distracted. She waited until the house was quiet, her heart pounding as she made her way to Jonathan's office. The door was closed this time, but not locked. She hesitated for a moment, her hand on the doorknob, before pushing it open. The room was just as she remembered, warm, lived in, and eerily at odds with the rest of the house's sterile perfection. Lisa moved quickly, knowing she didn't have much time. She opened the drawer beneath the desk and pulled out the stack of papers she had seen before. Her hands trembled as she sifted through them, her mind racing to connect the dots. Most of the documents were things she had already seen: medical records, financial statements, even photos of her with Timmy at the park. But buried beneath them was something new, a letter. The envelope was unmarked, the paper inside crisp and neatly folded. Lisa's stomach churned as she unfolded it and began to read. "Dear Jonathan, I hope this letter finds you well. I know it's been years since we last spoke, and I never thought I would reach out to you again, but I feel I have no choice. I've been struggling and I need your help. I know I hurt you, and I don't expect forgiveness. But if there's any part of you that still cares, please consider what I'm asking. It's not for me, it's for Timmy. He's your son, Jonathan. I can't do this alone anymore. He needs his father. Sincerely, Evelyn." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. Her mind reeled as the words blurred together, her vision swimming. Timmy, Evelyn, Jonathan. None of it made sense, and yet, somehow, it all made perfect sense. The way Jonathan had watched Timmy, the strange protectiveness he showed toward her pregnancy, the dossier detailing every aspect of her life. He had known about Timmy all along. Her hands shook as she folded the letter and shoved it back into the envelope. She barely had time to process what she had read before a noise from the hallway made her freeze. The sound of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, and getting closer. Lisa's heart raced as she slid the drawer shut and straightened up, clutching the edge of the desk to steady herself. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and she held her breath, willing whoever it was to leave. But instead, the door creaked open, and Jonathan stepped inside. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice low and cold. His eyes flicked to the desk, then back to her, suspicion darkening his expression. Lisa forced herself to stay calm, though every instinct screamed at her to run. "I was just looking for a pen," she said, hating how weak the lie sounded. "I wanted to write a note for Timmy's teacher." Jonathan's gaze lingered on her for a moment too long before he nodded slowly. "Next time ask. This room is private." "Of course," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. She stepped past him, her pulse thundering in her ears as she left the office and hurried back to her room. That night, Lisa couldn't sleep. She lay awake, clutching the memory of the letter like a live wire. Timmy was Jonathan's son. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, drowning her in a flood of emotions she couldn't name. Anger, betrayal, fear. It all blended together in a storm that refused to settle. Why hadn't Evelyn told her? Why had she hidden the truth? And why had Jonathan kept it from her even now? The questions burned inside her, and she knew she wouldn't find peace until she had answers. The next morning, she confronted him. Jonathan was in the dining room again, his usual cup of coffee in hand. He didn't look up as she entered, but she didn't give him the chance to brush her off. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. Jonathan's eyes met hers, his expression unreadable. "Tell you what?" "Don't play dumb," Lisa snapped, slamming the letter onto the table in front of him. "You knew. You knew Timmy was your son, and you didn't say a word." Jonathan's jaw tightened as he picked up the letter, his eyes scanning the words. When he looked back at her, there was no trace of the man who had seemed almost vulnerable the night he spoke about Evelyn. His face was a mask of cold control. "It wasn't my place to tell you," he said evenly. "Evelyn asked me not to." "That's not good enough," Lisa said, her voice rising. "You had no right to keep this from me. Timmy has a right to know who his father is. I have a right to know." Jonathan's expression darkened. "Do you think this is what I wanted?" he asked, his voice sharp. "To find out I had a son I never knew about? To lose Evelyn before I could make things right? None of this was my choice, Lisa. But I've done everything I can to fix it." Lisa shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "You think throwing money at the problem fixes it? You think moving us into this house and controlling every aspect of my life makes up for the fact that you lied to me? That you've been lying to Timmy his whole life?" "I did what I thought was best," Jonathan said, his tone clipped. For you. For Timmy. For everyone. Lisa stared at him, her chest heaving with the force of her anger. You don't get to decide what's best for us. Timmy isn't just some pawn in your game, Jonathan. He's a little boy who deserves the truth. Jonathan looked away, his jaw tightening as he struggled for control. For a moment, the silence between them was deafening. Then he sighed, his shoulders sagging as the fight drained out of him. You're right, he said quietly. Timmy deserves the truth. But he also deserves stability. A life where he's cared for, protected. That's all I've ever wanted for him. Lisa crossed her arms, her voice cold. If that's true, then you'll stop hiding behind your excuses and start being honest. Not just with me, but with him. Jonathan nodded, his expression heavy with resignation. I will. But I need time, Lisa. Please. Let me do this the right way. Lisa hesitated, her heart aching with the weight of the decision. She didn't trust him, not fully, but for Timmy's sake she agreed. Fine. But if you break that promise, Jonathan, I swear I'll never forgive you. The days that followed were tense, filled with awkward silences and strained interactions. Lisa kept a close eye on Jonathan, wary of any signs that he might back out of his promise. But to her surprise, he seemed genuine in his efforts. He spent more time with Timmy, slowly building a connection that, to Lisa's dismay, Timmy seemed to embrace wholeheartedly. It hurt to watch her son bond with the man who had kept so many secrets from them. But as much as she hated to admit it, there was a part of her that hoped Jonathan might finally prove her wrong. One evening, as the three of them sat in the garden, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Lisa felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to move forward. Together. But deep down, Lisa knew that the truth had a way of surfacing, and when it did, it had the power to shatter everything. Lisa tried her best to maintain a sense of normalcy in the days that followed, but everything felt different now. The truth about Timmy's parentage loomed over her like a dark cloud, and though Jonathan had promised to handle things the right way, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more he wasn't telling her. Trusting him was a fragile thread she wasn't sure would hold. Timmy, blissfully unaware of the tension between the adults in his life, had grown increasingly attached to Jonathan. Lisa watched as her son followed him around the garden, asking endless questions about the plants and the birds. Jonathan, to her surprise, was patient with him, answering each question with the kind of attention and care Lisa had never expected from him. It was almost enough to make her forget her anger. Almost. One afternoon, as Lisa sat on the porch watching Timmy and Jonathan play catch, she felt her phone vibrate in her pocket. She pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was Maria. Hey, Lisa said, keeping her voice low so as not to interrupt the laughter in the garden. Hey, Maria replied, her tone brisk. I've been doing some digging and I think you need to hear this. Lisa straightened, her heart quickening. What is it? It's Jonathan, Maria said. I looked him up, trying to find out more about his business. And, Lisa, something doesn't add up. He's not just a millionaire, he's tied to some pretty shady deals. Lawsuits, business takeovers, things that ruined people's lives. He's ruthless. Lisa swallowed hard, her grip tightening on the phone. That doesn't surprise me, she admitted. But what does that have to do with me? Or Timmy? Maria hesitated before speaking again. I found something else. There's this article. It's old, from years ago, but it talks about Jonathan and Evelyn. Apparently, their marriage wasn't as perfect as everyone thought. There were rumors of infidelity and a child. Lisa's blood ran cold. A child? Yes, Maria said. But the article didn't go into details. I don't know if it's true or just gossip, but it makes me wonder, did Evelyn know about you? About Timmy? Lisa shook her head, trying to process everything. I don't know, Maria. I don't know what to believe anymore. You need to be careful, Maria warned. Jonathan might seem like he cares about Timmy, but don't forget who he is. He's a man who's used to getting what he wants, no matter the cost. Lisa glanced at the garden, where Jonathan was helping Timmy tie his shoelaces. It was a simple, tender moment, one that looked so genuine it made her question everything Maria had just said. But deep down, she knew her friend was right. She couldn't let her guard down, Not yet. That evening, Lisa decided it was time to confront Jonathan again. She waited until Timmy was asleep, then found Jonathan in his study, seated at his desk with a glass of whiskey in hand. The room was dimly lit, the shadows casting an almost foreboding atmosphere. "We need to talk," Lisa said, her voice firm as she stepped inside. Jonathan looked up, his expression unreadable. "About what?" "About Evelyn," Lisa said, her gaze steady. "And about what you're not telling me." Jonathan's jaw tightened, and he set his glass down. "What do you mean?" "I mean the rumors," Lisa said, crossing her arms. "About your marriage. About a child." For a moment, Jonathan said nothing. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Then finally he spoke. "Evelyn and I had a complicated marriage," he admitted. "We loved each other, but we weren't perfect. And yes, there was a child. A son." Lisa's breath caught. "What happened to him?" Jonathan looked away, his expression pained. "He died. It was an accident. Evelyn never forgave herself. She blamed me and I blamed her. It broke us." Lisa stared at him, her heart aching despite her anger. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because it doesn't change anything," Jonathan said, his voice sharp. "What happened in the past is irrelevant. What matters now is Timmy." Lisa shook her head, her frustration boiling over. "It's not irrelevant, Jonathan. It's the reason you're doing all of this, isn't it? You're trying to replace the son you lost." Jonathan flinched, and for a moment, Lisa thought he might lash out. But instead, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe I am," he admitted. "But can you blame me? Timmy deserves a father, Lisa. And I'm trying to be that for him." Lisa's chest tightened, torn between anger and pity. "You can't just step in and claim that role, Jonathan. It's not that simple. He's my son. He's always been my son." Jonathan met her gaze, his expression softening. "And he'll always be your son. But he's mine too. Whether you like it or not." Lisa clenched her fists, tears stinging her eyes. She wanted to scream, to fight, to push him out of their lives for good. But she couldn't. Not when Timmy had already started to bond with him. Not when she could see the pain in Jonathan's eyes, the same pain she felt every time she thought about the struggles she'd faced alone. "We need to take this slow," she said finally, her voice trembling. "For Timmy's sake. He deserves to know the truth, but only when he's ready." Jonathan nodded, his shoulders sagging with relief. "Agreed." The days that followed were a fragile truce. Jonathan made an effort to be more present, spending time with Timmy while giving Lisa the space she needed. He was still guarded, still difficult to read, but there was a gentleness in his interactions with Timmy that Lisa couldn't ignore. One afternoon, as Lisa watched Jonathan and Timmy build a tower of blocks on the living room floor, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this could work. Maybe, despite everything, they could find a way to coexist for Timmy's sake. But that hope was short-lived. It happened late one night, when the house was quiet and Lisa was getting ready for bed. She heard a noise downstairs, a faint rustling, followed by the sound of a door closing. Her heart raced as she crept down the stairs, clutching a flashlight. The house was dark, the shadows stretching long and menacing across the walls. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, she saw a figure moving in the kitchen. For a moment, she froze, fear paralyzing her. Then she forced herself to step forward, shining the flashlight on the intruder. It was Jonathan. "What are you doing?" Lisa demanded, her voice trembling with adrenaline. Jonathan turned, his expression caught somewhere between guilt and frustration. "I didn't mean to wake you." "That's not what I asked," Lisa said, her tone sharp. "Why are you sneaking around in the middle of the night?" Jonathan hesitated, then sighed. "There's something I need to show you." Lisa frowned, lowering the flashlight. "What?" "Come with me," Jonathan said, gesturing for her to follow. "It's easier if I just show you." Against her better judgment, Lisa followed him out of the kitchen and down a hallway she had rarely ventured into. At the end of the hall was a door she had never seen open. Jonathan unlocked it with a key he pulled from his pocket, then pushed it open. The room beyond was small and dimly lit, lined with shelves filled with photographs, documents, and what looked like personal artifacts. Lisa stepped inside, her eyes wide as she took it all in. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This," Jonathan said, his tone heavy with emotion, "is everything I have left of Evelyn. And of my son." Lisa turned to look at him, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his expression. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you need to understand," Jonathan said. "This isn't about replacing what I lost. It's about making sure I don't lose anything else. Timmy is my second chance, Lisa. And I'm not going to waste it." Lisa stared at him, her mind spinning. She wanted to believe him, to trust that his intentions were as pure as he claimed. But there was still a part of her that couldn't shake the doubt, the fear that this was all too good to be true. "Jonathan," she began, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can do this." "You don't have to decide now," Jonathan said, his tone gentle. "Just think about it. For Timmy." Lisa nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Days turned into weeks, and Lisa found herself caught between conflicting emotions. She didn't trust Jonathan completely, not after all the secrets he'd kept. But she couldn't deny that he was making an effort. He spent time with Timmy, helping him build model airplanes, teaching him how to kick a soccer ball, and reading him bedtime stories. Timmy adored him, and his laughter echoed through the once silent halls of the house. For Timmy's sake, Lisa tried to make peace with the arrangement. But late at night, when she was alone with her thoughts, the doubts crept in. Maria's warnings about Jonathan's ruthless nature haunted her. Was he truly trying to make amends, or was there something darker at play? She couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing a piece of the puzzle. One evening, as she watched Timmy and Jonathan play chess in the living room, Jonathan's phone buzzed on the coffee table. He glanced at the screen, his expression briefly tense before he excused himself to take the call. Lisa's gaze followed him as he stepped into the hallway, his voice low and urgent. "Make sure everything is ready," she heard him say. "I don't want any mistakes." Lisa's stomach knotted. What was he planning? She wanted to confront him, but she didn't want to alarm Timmy. Instead, she filed the moment away, vowing to keep a closer eye on him. The opportunity came a few days later. Jonathan left for a meeting in the city, and Lisa was alone in the house with Timmy. After putting him down for a nap, she made her way to Jonathan's study. She hadn't been back since the night she found the letter, but her curiosity and her growing suspicion drove her forward. The study was as pristine as ever, the faint scent of leather and wood polish lingering in the air. Lisa went straight to the drawer where she'd found the letter, but it was empty. Frustrated, she searched the desk, opening every drawer and sifting through the neatly organized papers. Most of it seemed mundane, business contracts, financial reports, but one folder caught her attention. The folder was marked with a single word: project. Lisa opened it, her heart pounding as she scanned the contents. Inside were documents detailing plans for a trust fund, medical records, and legal agreements. But what made her blood run cold was a list of names, surrogates, potential candidates, all with detailed profiles similar to the one Jonathan had compiled on her. At the bottom of the list was her name, circled in red ink. Next to it was a note in Jonathan's handwriting: perfect candidate, strong maternal instinct, willing to fight for her child. Lisa's hands shook as she closed the folder. She felt like a pawn in some elaborate game she didn't fully understand. Jonathan had chosen her, not just because of her circumstances, but because he believed she would do whatever it took to protect Timmy. Was that supposed to be a compliment? Or was it just another manipulation? She placed the folder back in the drawer and closed it quietly. Her mind raced as she left the study and returned to her room. She needed to talk to someone, Maria, perhaps, but the fear of Jonathan finding out kept her silent. That night, Lisa's unease grew. Jonathan returned late, his mood darker than usual. He barely spoke during dinner, his responses clipped and distracted. Timmy seemed not to notice, chattering happily about his day, but Lisa watched Jonathan carefully, searching for any hint of what had put him on edge. After Timmy went to bed, Lisa confronted him. "Jonathan," she said, crossing her arms as she stood in the doorway to the living room. "We need to talk." He looked up from his drink, his expression tired but guarded. "What about?" About whatever it is you're hiding, Lisa said, her voice firm. I found the folder in your study. The one with my name on it. Jonathan's jaw tightened, and he set his glass down. You were in my study? Don't turn this around on me, Lisa snapped. I deserve to know the truth. What is this project, Jonathan? Why did you really choose me? Jonathan stared at her for a long moment before sighing. He ran a hand through his hair, his usual composure faltering. You want the truth? Fine. I chose you because you're strong, Lisa. Because I knew you wouldn't back down, no matter what. I needed someone who wouldn't just walk away. Walk away from what? Lisa demanded. What are you not telling me? Jonathan hesitated, his gaze flicking to the window as if searching for an escape. Finally he spoke. I didn't just want a surrogate, he said quietly. I wanted someone who could help me protect my child. Our child? Lisa frowned, confusion mingling with her anger. Protect? Protect from what? From people who would do anything to take him from me, Jonathan said, his voice heavy with emotion. My business. It's not as clean as I'd like it to be. I've made enemies, Lisa. Powerful ones. And if they found out about Timmy? He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Lisa's breath caught as the pieces fell into place. The secrecy, the control, the dossier, it was all part of an elaborate plan to ensure Timmy's safety. But that didn't make it right. You should have told me, Lisa said, her voice trembling. You should have trusted me. I couldn't take that risk, Jonathan said, his tone apologetic but firm. Not when so much was at stake. Lisa shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. You don't get to make those decisions for me, Jonathan. Timmy is my son. My life. You had no right. Jonathan looked away, guilt flashing across his face. I know, he said softly. But I didn't know any other way. Lisa turned and left the room, her heart heavy with anger and betrayal. She needed time to think, to process everything she had just learned. But one thing was clear, she couldn't stay in this house much longer. The next morning, Lisa woke early, her resolve hardening as the sun rose. She packed a bag for Timmy and herself, stuffing it with as much as she could without drawing attention. She didn't know where they would go, but she knew they couldn't stay. Timmy was still asleep when she gently shook him awake. Sweetheart, she whispered, brushing his hair back. We're going on a little trip, okay? Timmy yawned, rubbing his eyes. A trip? Where? It's a surprise, Lisa said, forcing a smile. But we need to leave now. Timmy nodded sleepily, too young to question her urgency. Lisa grabbed the bag and took his hand, leading him quietly down the stairs. She prayed that Jonathan was still asleep, that they could slip out unnoticed. But as they reached the front door, a voice stopped her in her tracks. Going somewhere? Lisa turned slowly, her heart sinking as she saw Jonathan standing at the top of the stairs. His expression was calm, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that made her stomach churn. I'm leaving, Lisa said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. You can't stop me. Jonathan descended the stairs, his movements deliberate and measured. I won't stop you, he said. But you need to understand something, Lisa. If you leave now, you're putting Timmy in danger. Lisa glared at him, tightening her grip on Timmy's hand. The only danger to Timmy is you. Jonathan stopped a few feet away, his expression softening. I know you don't trust me, and I don't blame you. But I swear to you, everything I've done has been to protect him. To protect both of you. Lisa hesitated, her resolve wavering. Why should I believe you? Because you know me, Jonathan said, his voice low and earnest. You've seen how much I care about Timmy. About you. If you leave now, you're on your own. But if you stay, I promise I'll do whatever it takes to keep you both safe. Lisa stared at him, torn between her fear and the flicker of sincerity in his eyes. She wanted to run, to get as far away from him as possible. But a part of her, small but persistent, wanted to believe him. I need time, she said finally, her voice shaking. I need to think. Jonathan nodded, stepping back. Take all the time you need. Just know that whatever you decide, I'll be here. For both of you. Lisa turned and led Timmy back upstairs, her mind spinning. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain, her life would never be the same.